Edgewood University. Year 1. Episode 6. Change. First, always remember, you have within you the strength, the passion, and the patience to reach for the stars and change the world. Harriet Tubman. I don't think I should have even given you that. You look a little young to be in a bar, said the bartender, and Layla scoffed, laughing and leaning against the wall. Who's going to tell on me? No one even knows my name, she whispered and laughed. The girl laughed, poured a shot of the glowing liquid, and knocked it back. My name's Faith, she said, and Layla put her finger to her lips. She leaned over the bar and pressed her lips to Faith's ear. She noticed her brother looking at them and tilting his head. It's Layla, but shush, it's our secret. She giggled, and Faith busted out laughing. Layla sat on her stool, looked around the room, and noticed a handsome, muscular man with gold eyes and long brown hair staring at her. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood over his head covering half of his face. He's kind of cute, she said, and Faith snickered. If you're referring to the pup with gold eyes, that's my brother, she said, and Layla giggled. I'm sorry. It's fine. He's a whore. I get it all the time, she said, and she heard the man growl. Layla chuckled, looked at the man, and back at Faith. So, well, where are you from? She asked, washing a glass, and Layla gave her a thoughtful look. It's okay. You can call me Layla. I was only fooling. Edgewood University. I just got there about a week ago, and that place is so strange. I wanted to get away as far as possible, but it seems there's no end to this nightmare. She looked at her hands and fidgeted with her rings. There are some things I still need to process. I wasn't born in this world, she said in a soft voice, and Faith looked at her with care. I think you just need a little time. I never met a human before. Bad choice for coming into a bar full of rabid dogs, but good choice of sitting at the bar. She snickered, and Layla smiled. Faith sighed and wiped down the bar. So how did you get here? The school is at least 5 or 6 miles from here. Layla sipped her drink and gave her a clever look. Believe it or not, I ran, she said, rubbing her glass with her thumb. Well, you're in good shape. Faith laughed, and Layla chuckled. So, have you learned any magic? My brother Cody goes there. He always shows me cool stuff when he comes home during the summer. Me and my brother Connor are headed there tomorrow if you want to hitch a ride. We finally were able to get tuition money together. Sorry, I'm rambling, said Faith, and Layla chuckled. She glanced at Faith's brother and noticed Connor didn't seem to share the same excitement, but he was fascinated with her. She snorted, feeling something weird, and looked at Faith, shaking the feeling. I get it. You're excited. And as far as magic is concerned, watch this, she said, snapping her fingers. Faith gasped as Layla's hand and wrist ignited with bright orange flames and blew a breath. Layla heard the men mumbling behind her, and she smirked, watching her hand as her eyes began to glow crimson. Faith leaned toward her and searched her eyes. You're an alpha? She whispered, and Layla nodded. Faith put her finger to her lips, and Layla gave her a knowing look. Wow, that's amazing. So you're a fire fairy? She asked, straightening. Layla heard chairs scraping across the wooden floors and turned her head. The men, including Faith's brother, stood staring like they were waiting for her answer, and she decided not to tell them she was a hellcat. She looked at Faith and sighed. Maybe. I'm not sure what I am, she whispered, and the flames disappeared. When you get off work and we go back to your place, then we can talk, she added. Faith only nodded and glanced at her brother. The men sat down, and the gold-eyed man approached the bar. Layla took a sip of her glowing drink as he stood beside her and looked her over. She set her glass down, licked her lips, and looked at the surprisingly large man. Can I help you? The man pressed his lips together and shook his head. I don't think you're anything close to a fire fairy, he said, and Layla gave him a clever look. Never said I was. Faith looked at the man, scoffed, and slammed her hand on the bar. Connor, leave the poor girl alone. Go play with your bitches and strays. She snapped, and Connor laughed. He looked in his mid-20s, tall and muscular, with a well-kept short beard and long brown hair to match. His voice was deep and sent tingles through Layla's body. Connor looked at Layla, noticing her checking him out, and he raised his eyebrows looking at his sister. Come on, Faith. You never let me have any fun. Look, This one is interested already, and she's a beauty, he said, making a face, and Layla snorted. Faith smacked Layla's arm with a towel and looked sternly at her. Don't encourage him, she said, waving her hands at her brother to go away. Run along now. Go play with your pups and howl at the moon or something. Connor laughed and glanced at Layla. Would love to have you along for the ride. You can sleep in my room if you want to. I promise I won't bite too hard. He teased and walked away laughing. The group of men at his table laughed, and he sat down and gave Layla a smug look. Layla scoffed, hugged herself, and growled. She hated pig-headed men. Faith looked at her and sighed. Sorry for my arrogant brother. He seems to be more bullheaded ever since our father died, and he became the alpha of our pack, she said, glaring at her brother. Layla gave her a frantic look, feeling the power of the glowing drink. You're werewolves, she exclaimed, looking at Connor and back at Faith. Yeah, you sound surprised. Layla began panting heavily, wondering if everyone in Edgewood was connected to the strange world, and Faith looked at her oddly. Hey, Layla, are you okay? She asked. Layla gripped the edge of the bar, cringing and trying to fight the surging magic, and she gave Faith a frantic look. No, not again. Layla cried distortedly and whimpered. Faith saw her eyes flash red and gave her a knowing look. Leave your purse with me and go outside now. I will have clothes for you when you come back, she instructed. Layla knew she didn't have time for questions and ran out of the bar. Faith watched her leave and gave her brother a worried look. Connor got up from the table and walked toward his sister. I think you're right. She's not a fire fairy, and she's about to lose control, she said, and Connor ran outside. The assembly was over, and the students went back to their dormitories. Bailey, Cassidy? Rhea called, and the girls looked at the headmistress. Would you kindly find out where your roommate ran off to? She asked, and the girls nodded. Cassidy and Bailey searched the suite, and Layla wasn't there. Where could she have gone? Asked Cassidy, and Bailey shrugged. Lay, called Tyler, walking into the room, and the girls looked at him. Where is she? He asked, and Bailey's eyebrows shot down in anger. Come back in 3 days. Maybe she'll turn up, she snapped. We don't know, but I'm pretty sure you have something to do with her running off, said Cassidy, grabbed Bailey's hand, and walked out of the room. Tyler growled, looking at the ceiling, cursed, and ran after them. Layla ran into the forest and stopped, grabbing her head. She cried, looking at the sky, and the world seemed to spin. What's happening to me? She cried frantically, panting. She felt a burning sensation under her skin get hotter, dropped to her knees, and screamed in pain. She groaned as her bones began to crack and break, and she whimpered at the excruciating pain. Suddenly, the enormous, flaming dragon wings shot from her back and wrapped around her, and Layla screamed. Connor stopped, hearing Layla's screams, and ran toward them. He hid behind a tree and watched the wings cradle her naked, cream-colored body. He listened and heard her short, panting gasps and noticed how helpless she looked. He felt a tingling sensation in the back of his mind and shook his head. What was that? Connor looked at Layla, and she transformed into a slick black panther. His eyes widened, and he tilted his head. The large cat stood, shaking its head and opening red, glowing eyes. The giant flaming wings rested on the animal's back, and Connor inhaled sharply to realize what Layla was, and his instincts took over. He snarled, growing sharp teeth, and his eyes turned crimson. The panther looked at Connor, growled, and swished its tail, annoyed. He took a deep breath and roared. The panther jumped in front of him, gave him a sly look, and roared an ear-piercing feline roar. The alpha Hellcat dragon spark roar was so powerful that the waves hit the school, and Tyler's, Cassidy's, and Bailey's ears perked up. What was that? Asked Bailey. Tyler listened closely to the undertones and realized it was an alpha calling, but it was strange and not his father's roar. Another roar echoed through the halls, and it belonged to another alpha. He looked at Bailey and Cassidy and swallowed hard. That was 2 different roars. 2 alpha roars? And they're about to fight? The girls gasped and looked at each other wide-eyed. Do you think Layla's one of them? Asked Cassidy, and Tyler shook his head. I'm not sure. There are a few alphas in the mountains and one out at the bar. Tyler? Maya called, running down the hallway. He looked at his mother and noticed the panic across her face. "Here, come with me now," she demanded, seeing Cassidy and Bailey. Tyler gave the girls an apologetic look and ran off with his mother. Cassidy scoffed and shook her head. "Like you were invited," she breathed, and Bailey snickered. "Your father has escaped? Have you found Layla?" Maya asked, and Tyler looked at his mother wide-eyed, shaking his head. "Do you think he took her?" he asked. Maya gave her son a worried look, and Tyler growled. "We have to find her now," he said, and ran toward Cassidy and Bailey. "Check the school? Check everywhere?" he yelled, running toward the exit. Connor dropped to his knees and grabbed his head. The feline alpa's roar broke his instincts and made him succumb to her. "Layla, stop, please," he breathed, and the panther stopped roaring. He blew a heavy breath, looking at the hellcat, and Layla swished her tail. He looked at her oddly as she crouched and shook her behind, ready to pounce. "Layla, don't you dare," he said. The panther snorted, leapt in the air, and tackled him to the ground. She stared into his eyes, and Connor saw her eyes shimmer. He slowly reached his hand toward her face, and surprisingly, Layla pressed her face into his palm and purred. He looked into her eyes, and their eyes shimmered. Layla jumped off, walked ahead of him, and turned. He sat up, looked at her oddly, and sighed. He didn't understand. Did he connect with her? How was that possible? And if he did connect with her, then that meant... Connor's head snapped toward the hellcat, and the animal snarled at him, crouched and ready to pounce. He sighed. He didn't want to fight her, but needed to get her to phase back. He realized how much stronger she was and decided to take a different approach. He looked at Layla, spread his arms, and blew a breath, bowing and hoping this would work. "You want me? Come get me. I'm all yours, Layla," he said as his eyes stopped glowing. The panther's head raised and tilted. Layla felt a tingle in the back of her mind and realized he surrendered to her. He didn't even know her. Was that part of his little joke when he said she could sleep in his bed? Her ears flicked as she lowered her head and hissed, showing sharp teeth. With her claws out, she growled and leaped into the air, and Connor was ready for her. He extended his claws and scratched her underbelly. The ancient cat yelped, clawing Connor's face, and tumbled on the ground. Connor groaned, grabbed his face, and watched where Layla landed. He watched the flaming wings wrap around the Black Panther's body, changing her back to human, and the wings disappeared, leaving Layla in the grass unconscious. He blew a breath, getting to his feet, and he walked toward the naked girl. He pulled off his jacket, covered her, and paused, looking at her beautiful face. Connor felt an attraction start to build, and his eyes shimmered. He shook his head and scolded himself to focus, but struggled to regroup because her sweet scent invaded his nostrils. "Come on, let's get you back where you belong." He gently scooped her petite body in his arms and carried her back to the bar. Two men standing outside opened the door for their alpha, and Connor nodded, walking inside. He gave his sister a knowing look, and she looked at Layla in his face. "Jesus Christ, Connor, what did you do?" she asked, grabbing a wet towel and dabbing his wounds. He cringed with every touch and moved his head away. The cuts were deep and stung. "I didn't do anything. She's still alive. She transformed for the first time, and trust me, she's no fire fairy," he whispered. Connor adjusted his arms, and the jacket slipped off the unconscious girl. The pack members tried to look at her as Faith covered Layla back up, and Connor snarled at them. "This one's mine," he growled, and the men stepped back. Faith looked at her brother oddly and noticed an orange tint in his eyes. "What is she? What happened out there?" she whispered, and he shook his head. "Not here. Close up and get Alex. Looks like we're starting school early." "Okay, I'll call Headmistress Tate, and there are clothes on my bed for her. Get her dressed and meet me in the car," she said. Connor looked at his sister and swallowed hard. "You don't want to get her dressed. But I have to close and get Alex. What are you so uptight about? You've seen plenty of naked women." She scoffed, and Layla snorted. "It's okay. I have enough strength to get dressed myself, but that's about it," whispered Layla, and Connor sighed in relief. Faith snorted and waved her brother upstairs. Connor put Layla on the bed and turned around. He stayed close in case she needed help and looked at the doorway. "So, what happened?" she asked in a faint voice. "You evolved," he said. Layla slipped on blue leggings and a white sports bra and tapped his shoulder. He turned around, and she weakly smiled. She noticed a wolf tattoo on his chest and pulled his button-down shirt aside. She touched it gently and smiled. "It's beautiful, just like you," she whispered, looking into his eyes, and Connor watched her eyes roll into the back of her head. He caught her and smiled, looking at her pretty face. He wrapped his oversized jacket around her, scooped her into his arms, and walked downstairs.